"You are trespassing on private property," a shrill voice pierced the peaceful afternoon air. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs as I stood knee-deep in the cool, clear waters of Willow Creek Lake, my fishing rod poised. Officer Miller and Officer Davis, their faces unreadable, approached. Behind them, arms crossed and a triumphant smirk plastered on her face, stood Brenda, the self-proclaimed queen of our HOA. I stared, bewildered, as Officer Miller began, "Sir, we've received a complaint about you being on private property." Private property? This was my lake, part of the land I'd painstakingly saved for years to buy. How could I be trespassing? A cold dread washed over me, but Brenda's smug expression fueled a fire within me. She truly believed she had me, yet she was grievously mistaken. Little did she know, this wasn't just my lake. It was also a place with a hidden past, a history she was about to unearth in the most humiliating way possible. Years earlier, long before Brenda and her meticulous rulebook dominated our neighborhood, I was just a kid named Ben, growing up in a small town not far from here. My days were filled with adventures in the woods, building treehouses, and imagining fantastical creatures lurking in the shadows of the ancient oak trees. My best friend, Sam, lived just down the street. Sam was a whirlwind of energy, always pulling me into new escapades, whether it was daring each other to climb the tallest pine or trying to skip rocks all the way across the creek. We spent countless hours by a small, shimmering pond, not nearly as grand as Willow Creek Lake, but magical in its own way. We'd pretend to be explorers charting unknown territories, our imaginations making ordinary puddles into vast oceans. Life back then was simple, filled with the warmth of childhood friendships and the comforting rhythm of small-town life. My parents, bless their hearts, always encouraged my love for nature. My dad, a quiet man with kind eyes, taught me how to identify different birds by their songs and how to cast a fishing line. He'd often say, "Ben, the best things in life aren't things at all, they're moments, especially those spent in the quiet embrace of nature." Those words stuck with me, shaping my desire for a life connected to the natural world. My mom, always practical and grounded, would pack us lunches for our outdoor excursions, making sure we had enough snacks and water to fuel our grand adventures. She believed in independence and taught me the importance of being prepared for anything, a lesson that would prove invaluable later in life. As I grew older, the simple joys of childhood began to intertwine with the complexities of adolescence. School became more demanding, and friendships, while still important, faced new challenges. Sam and I drifted slightly as our interests diverged. He got into sports, spending hours on the basketball court, while I found myself drawn more to books and quiet contemplation by the creek. Still, a bond remained, a silent understanding forged in countless shared memories. We'd occasionally meet up, sharing updates about our lives, the conversations shorter but still carrying the weight of our shared history. After high school, I left our small town for college, a new chapter opening before me. The city was a stark contrast to the sprawling fields and winding creeks I'd known. Concrete replaced trees, and the constant hum of traffic drowned out the chirping of crickets. It was exciting, a vibrant tapestry of new experiences and people, but I often found myself longing for the tranquility of nature. During breaks, I'd return home, seeking solace in the familiar landscapes. I'd walk the old trails, revisiting the spots where Sam and I had built our makeshift forts, a bittersweet nostalgia washing over me. The pond we'd played by seemed smaller now, but no less significant, a constant reminder of simpler times. My career in software development took off quickly after college. I was good at it, and the work was engaging, but the long hours in front of a computer screen left me feeling disconnected from the world outside. I started spending my weekends hiking, camping, anything to escape the fluorescent lights and hum of servers. It was during one of these solo trips that I stumbled upon an old, forgotten map in a dusty antique shop. It was hand-drawn, detailing local waterways and land parcels, and prominently marked was Willow Creek Lake, described as a hidden gem, untouched by development. The description resonated deeply with me. The idea of owning a piece of untouched nature, a personal sanctuary, began to take root in my mind. For years, I meticulously saved every extra penny. I researched land deeds, zoning laws, and environmental regulations. It was a daunting task, filled with legal jargon and endless paperwork. There were times I felt overwhelmed, wondering if I was chasing an impossible dream. My friends, mostly city dwellers, found my obsession with rural land quaint, even a little eccentric. "Why would you want to live somewhere with no decent coffee shops, Ben?" my friend Sarah would tease, her eyes twinkling. I'd just smile and tell them about the fresh air, the starry nights, and the profound quiet that city life could never offer. They didn't quite understand, but they respected my determination. Finally, after nearly a decade of relentless saving and searching, I found it, a substantial plot of land, bordered on one side by the very Willow Creek Lake I'd seen on that old map. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, had lived there her entire life. She was a kind, gentle soul who loved the land deeply and wanted it to go to someone who would cherish it. We spent hours talking on her porch, sipping sweet tea, as she shared stories of the lake, of her childhood fishing with her father, and of the unique ecosystem it supported. She told me about the rare birds that nested there and the fish that thrived in its waters. Her stories only deepened my resolve. The sale wasn't just a transaction, it felt like a sacred transfer of stewardship. Moving to Willow Creek Lake was like stepping into a different world. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves, and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. I built a modest cabin, blending it into the natural landscape as much as possible. It was a labor of love, every nail hammered, every plank placed, filled with the dream of a peaceful existence. I spent my days exploring my property, learning every curve of the creek, every rise of the land. I learned to identify the native plants and spent hours observing the wildlife. There was a family of deer that frequently visited the clearing near my cabin, and a majestic bald eagle that often soared above the lake. I felt a sense of belonging, a deep connection to the land that I had never experienced before. Then came the development. Slowly at first, then rapidly, the open field surrounding my property began to transform. Large signs announcing luxury lakefront estates sprouted up, promising manicured lawns and exclusive amenities. I watched, a knot forming in my stomach, as trees were felled and pristine land was churned into mud. My quiet sanctuary was becoming part of a sprawling, upscale community. I tried to remain optimistic, hoping the new residents would respect the natural beauty of the area. I held on to the belief that not everyone was seeking just luxury, but also the tranquility that had drawn me here. The final phase of the development involved the creation of a homeowners association. This was when Brenda arrived, like a perfectly coiffed storm cloud. She moved into the largest house, a sprawling mansion with more windows than I could count, and immediately took charge of the HOA. Her pronouncements were swift and absolute. No garden gnomes, no unusual paint colors, no unapproved lawn ornaments. Her reign was one of strict adherence to rules, many of which seemed to exist solely to exert control. She saw herself as the guardian of the neighborhood's pristine image, and anything that deviated from her vision was met with swift, unwavering opposition. I, with my slightly wild, natural landscaping and my rustic cabin, was clearly an anomaly in her perfectly ordered world. I tried to be a good neighbor, attending the occasional HOA meeting, offering suggestions for community gardens, and even volunteering to help clear a walking path. My efforts were met with polite but firm resistance, mostly from Brenda. She had a way of smiling sweetly while dismissing your ideas as not quite fitting with the aesthetic of the community. It was clear that my vision of natural harmony clashed with her desire for manicured perfection. The tension was subtle at first, a polite disagreement over shrub height or the color of my mailbox, but it steadily escalated. One sunny afternoon, I was out on Willow Creek Lake, enjoying the peace and quiet, my fishing line lazily cast. The gentle lapping of the water against my small boat was the only sound. A light breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient trees along the shore. I had just felt a gentle tug on my line when I heard it. The distinct blare of a megaphone, echoing across the water. "You! In the boat! You are in violation of HOA regulations." It was Brenda, standing on the newly built community dock, megaphone in hand, her face a mask of indignation. I sighed, reeled in my line, and slowly paddled towards the dock, wondering what fresh offense I had committed this time. Perhaps my boat was the wrong shade of green, or my fishing hat too informal for her meticulous standards. I couldn't help but smile slightly at the absurdity of it all. This was my lake, and she was shouting at me about HOA regulations on it. I approached the dock, ready for another lecture on community guidelines, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. She pointed a trembling finger at me, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine outrage, and then, to my utter astonishment, she pulled out her phone and began to dial, all while keeping her unwavering gaze fixed on me. "I'm calling the authorities," she declared, her voice ringing with a chilling certainty. "You are trespassing." My breath caught in my throat. This was no longer about garden gnomes or mailbox colors. This was an escalation I hadn't anticipated, a true moment of high drama. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the sheer audacity of her accusation. My own lake. My own property. The audacity. And then, I saw the flashing lights in the distance, growing closer with alarming speed, confirming her outrageous claim was becoming a reality. The flashing lights of the police cruiser pulsed red and blue against the serene green of the trees, a jarring disruption to the peaceful afternoon. Officer Miller and Officer Davis approached, their expressions grim as Brenda, our HOA's self-appointed warden, pointed a finger at me with theatrical indignation. "He's been warned repeatedly," she declared, her voice dripping with false authority, "but he insists on trespassing on private HOA property." My chest tightened, a mixture of disbelief and anger bubbling inside me. How could she twist the truth so brazenly? This lake was undeniably mine. "Sir," Officer Miller began, his tone firm but not accusatory, "can you explain why you are on this property?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "Officers, this isn't HOA property. This is Willow Creek Lake, and it's part of the land I own. My deed clearly states it." I gestured vaguely towards my cabin, barely visible through the trees. Brenda scoffed, a short, sharp sound. "He's delusional. This lake is clearly marked as common area for the residents of Serenity Shores. We have signs. We have rules." Officer Davis, a younger officer who looked a little overwhelmed by the situation, spoke up. "Ma'am, there are no trespassing signs on this side of the lake, where he's fishing." Brenda's face flushed. "Well, there should be. It's implied. Everyone knows this is HOA property." "Implied isn't the same as posted," Officer Miller stated calmly, then turned back to me. "Do you have any proof of ownership, sir? A deed or property lines?" "Of course," I replied, a wave of relief washing over me. "It's back at my cabin. I can go get it for you." Brenda interjected, her voice rising in pitch, "He'll just disappear. He'll run away. He's a menace to this community." "Ma'am, please calm down," Officer Miller said, his patience visibly wearing thin. "We're just trying to establish the facts." He looked at me. "If you could retrieve your documentation, that would be helpful." I nodded and began to paddle my small boat towards my cabin, the officers watching me intently. Brenda, however, was not finished. "This is ridiculous. He's clearly breaking the rules. You should be issuing him a citation right now." As I paddled, I could hear Brenda's increasingly agitated voice echoing across the water, her complaints growing louder and more frantic. The officers, I noticed, seemed to be exchanging tired glances. It was clear Brenda had a reputation for being, well, Brenda. Reaching my cabin, I quickly retrieved my property deed, a thick stack of papers that detailed the history of the land, including the exact boundaries of my ownership, which encompassed a significant portion of Willow Creek Lake. I also grabbed an old, laminated copy of the original survey map, which clearly showed the lake as part of my parcel. Armed with my proof, I returned to the shore. When I presented the documents to Officer Miller, he meticulously reviewed them, his brow furrowed in concentration. Officer Davis leaned over, pointing to various sections of the map. Brenda, meanwhile, stood fuming, her arms crossed, her foot tapping impatiently. The silence, save for the rustling leaves and the distant chirping of birds, was thick with tension. Finally, Officer Miller looked up, his expression unreadable as he met my gaze, then Brenda's. According to these documents, sir, your property does indeed extend to and include a substantial portion of Willow Creek Lake. This part of the lake, where you were fishing, is within your legal property lines. A triumphant surge went through me. Brenda's jaw dropped, her face paling. That's impossible, she shrieked, her voice cracking. The HOA owns the lake. It's a community amenity. Ma'am, Officer Miller said, his voice now colder, the legal documents state otherwise. His deed predates the HOA's establishment, and his land parcel includes this section of the lake. Brenda sputtered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Her perfectly coiffed hair seemed to droop slightly, and the triumphant smirk she'd worn earlier had vanished, replaced by a look of utter shock and growing indignation. The idea that someone else, especially someone like me who didn't fit into her neat little boxes, could own something she believed was hers was clearly unfathomable to her. This is an outrage, she finally managed, her voice trembling with barely suppressed rage. This is a mistake. There must be some error. Officer Davis chimed in, we've reviewed the county records, ma'am. Mr. Davies's deed is legitimate. He is not trespassing. In fact, he paused, and a subtle change came over his expression, a hint of something more serious. It appears you are on his private property right now. The words hung in the air like an unexpected clap of thunder on a clear day. Brenda froze, her eyes widening, not just in disbelief, but in a sudden, dawning realization of her precarious position. The air around us seemed to thicken, the previous tension giving way to an even more profound quiet, punctuated only by the distant calls of birds. The officers stood there, their faces now entirely serious, waiting for her reaction. I watched, a strange mix of satisfaction and unease swirling within me. This was a moment of true irony, a complete reversal of fortunes, and the look on Brenda's face was utterly priceless. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, as if she were a fish out of water, gasping for air. The smugness that had defined her presence earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a dawning horror that was almost comical. Then, a sudden, piercing shriek tore through the air, but it wasn't Brenda's. It was a child's cry, high-pitched and filled with terror, coming from the direction of the newly constructed HOA playground, just beyond Brenda's mansion. All heads whipped around. My heart leaped into my throat. Something was terribly wrong. This wasn't part of the script, not part of Brenda's petty power plays. This was real. And from the panic in the child's voice, it sounded like an extreme event was unfolding right before our eyes. The child's scream tore through the air, sharp and desperate, instantly eclipsing the petty squabble over property lines. All eyes, including the officers and even Brenda's, snapped towards the playground. My heart pounded with a new kind of fear, a primal instinct overriding everything else. The immediate threat of a trespassing accusation faded into insignificance compared to the sheer terror in that small voice. What was that? Officer Davis exclaimed, already moving. Officer Miller was right behind him, both police officers abandoning their roles as property dispute mediators and transforming into emergency responders. Brenda, for all her bluster, looked genuinely startled, her face momentarily stripped of its usual self-importance. She looked pale and uncertain, a stark contrast to her earlier commanding presence. I didn't wait. The cry had sounded too urgent, too filled with genuine panic. I sprinted towards the playground, my mind racing through all the terrible possibilities. A child could be hurt, or worse. The last thing I heard as I ran was Brenda stammering, but what about my complaint? It was an absurd question, utterly tone-deaf in the face of what was happening. Reaching the playground, a chaotic scene unfolded. A small crowd of parents had gathered, their faces etched with concern. A group of children huddled together, pointing towards the large, elaborate climbing structure. And there, dangling precariously from the very top, was a little girl, no older than 6, her bright pink shirt a stark contrast against the dark green of the playground equipment. Her foot was caught in a gap in the netting, and she was swaying dangerously, her small hands scrambling for a hold. Her cries were now softer, more whimpers of terror, as if she was losing strength. "Get her down!" A woman shrieked, her voice frantic. "Someone help her!" Panic was starting to set in among the adults. One father bravely attempted to climb the structure, but it was too high, and the handholds were designed for smaller children. He slipped, nearly falling, and had to give up, frustration and fear etched on his face. The little girl continued to dangle, her whimpers growing weaker. She was tiring quickly, and it was clear she couldn't hold on much longer. The police officers arrived, quickly assessing the situation. "We need a ladder," Officer Miller shouted, his voice cutting through the rising panic. "Does anyone have a ladder?" "There's one in the HOA storage shed," Brenda finally piped up, her voice surprisingly steady, "but it's locked. Only the groundskeeper has the key, and he's not here." A collective groan went through the crowd. Precious seconds were ticking by. The little girl gave a small, desperate sob. That's when I saw it. A thick, sturdy rope coiled neatly by the side of the playground shed, left there perhaps by a maintenance worker. It was meant for pulling equipment, but it was strong enough for this. An idea, risky but possibly effective, flashed into my mind. My years of climbing trees as a kid, of exploring the wild places around my home, suddenly seemed profoundly relevant. I knew I could climb that structure, even if it wasn't built for adults. The question was, could I do it fast enough, and safely enough, to reach her? "I'll go," I announced, my voice firm. "I can climb up there." Brenda stared at me, then at the rope, then back at the dangling child. Her usual imperiousness was gone, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. "You? But, it's dangerous." "Less dangerous than letting her fall," I retorted, already grabbing the rope. It was long enough. My plan was simple. Climb as high as I could, toss the rope to the little girl if she could catch it, or if not, climb to her level and try to free her foot. Officer Miller looked at me, a hint of admiration in his eyes. "Be careful, sir." I nodded, gave the rope a quick test for strength, and began to scale the climbing structure. It was challenging. My adult frame was awkward, the plastic handholds small and slippery under my weight. I could feel the structure groaning slightly under me, but I pushed on, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The child's whimpers grew louder as I approached, her eyes wide with fear. "Hey there, little one," I called softly, trying to sound calm despite my own pounding heart. "I'm coming to help you. Just hold on a little longer." Her eyes, filled with tears, met mine, and for a second, a flicker of hope appeared in them. That gave me renewed strength. I reached the level just below her, my muscles screaming in protest. The little girl's foot was truly stuck, wedged in a narrow gap where two pieces of netting had come apart. She was crying softly now, tears streaming down her face, her small hands clutching desperately at a thin plastic bar. "Can you reach my hand?" I asked, stretching out my arm, my fingertips just brushing her shoelaces. She tried to reach, but her fear and the awkward angle made it impossible. Her leg was twisted, and she was clearly in pain. I knew I had to get closer, even if it meant risking a fall myself. I pulled myself up a little higher, my grip secure on the rough plastic. Now I was directly below her. "Okay, I'm going to try to free your foot," I explained gently, trying to keep her calm. "It might hurt a little, but then you'll be safe." Carefully, I reached up, my fingers brushing against her tiny ankle. The netting was incredibly tight around her foot. I pulled gently, trying to assess the best angle. It was clear that simply pulling wouldn't work, it would only hurt her more. I needed leverage, a way to widen the gap just enough to free her. I looked around desperately, my eyes scanning for anything that could help. Suddenly, a glimmer of light caught my eye, a small, discarded piece of metal, perhaps a broken clip from another part of the playground, was lodged in the netting near her foot. It was sharp, and it looked just strong enough to pry open the gap. It was a risky maneuver, one slip and I could make things worse, or even send us both tumbling. But time was running out. The little girl's grip was visibly weakening, her breathing ragged. I made a decision. With extreme care, I reached for the metal piece, my fingers trembling slightly. The crowd below was silent, watching with bated breath. Even Brenda, I noticed, was no longer yelling, her face pale with concern. It was a moment of intense focus, every ounce of my concentration on the delicate task before me. The life of this small child, a stranger to me, depended on my next move. The wind suddenly picked up, rustling the leaves in the nearby trees, and the structure swayed slightly under our combined weight. A wave of dizziness washed over me, but I pushed through it, my eyes fixed on the trapped foot. I had to get this right. I slowly, meticulously, began to insert the metal piece into the gap, praying it would give just enough. The stakes were incredibly high, and the silence from the ground below only amplified the pounding of my own heart. With painstaking care, I slid the sharp, discarded metal piece into the narrow gap where the netting had ensnared the little girl's foot. The plastic was tough, surprisingly rigid, and it resisted my efforts. My fingers, already aching from the climb, strained against the material. Below, the hushed anticipation from the crowd was a palpable weight, and the little girl's soft whimpers were the only sounds I could hear so close. I pushed harder, gritting my teeth, trying to find just the right angle, just the right amount of force. Slowly, agonizingly, the gap widened, just a fraction of an inch. It was enough. "Almost there, sweetie," I murmured, my voice raspy. "Just a little more." I twisted her tiny foot gently, guiding it through the widened space. A small cry of pain escaped her lips, but then, with a soft pop, her foot was free. A collective gasp, then a relieved sigh, rose from the crowd below. The little girl, her foot now unburdened, immediately sagged, her eyes rolling back slightly. She was safe, but clearly exhausted and in shock. "Got you," I whispered, pulling her close against my chest. She was so light, fragile. Her small arms instinctively wrapped around my neck, trembling. I held her securely, carefully maneuvering my body to begin the descent. Climbing down with her was even more challenging than climbing up. I had to use one arm to support her and the other to grip the slippery plastic, relying on my legs to brace us. Each step was deliberate, slow, and measured. Finally, with a soft thud, my feet touched the ground. A collective cheer erupted from the parents, and the little girl's mother, tears streaming down her face, rushed forward. She snatched her daughter from my arms, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Oh, my baby! My brave, brave girl," she sobbed, peppering her with kisses. The little girl, still whimpering, pointed a shaky finger at me. He saved me, Mommy." The mother looked up, her eyes, red-rimmed but filled with profound gratitude, met mine. "Thank you," she choked out, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, so much. You saved her life. I just nodded, still catching my breath, my own heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. Officer Miller and Officer Davis approached, their expressions clearly impressed. That was quick thinking, sir, Officer Miller commended. Very well done. Brenda, surprisingly, had remained silent throughout the rescue. She stood a little apart from the crowd, watching the scene unfold. When the little girl was safe, she slowly walked over, her face still pale. I suppose I owe you an apology, she said, her voice surprisingly soft, almost hesitant. About everything. I was wrong. It was a rare moment of humility from Brenda, and it caught me off guard. I simply nodded, unsure how to respond. The crisis had temporarily dissolved the animosity between us, replaced by a shared moment of relief and, perhaps, a glimmer of mutual respect. But the reprieve was short-lived. Just as the crowd began to disperse, a new voice cut through the air, sharp and demanding. What in the world happened here? Why is there a crowd on the common property? It was Mr. Sterling, a stern, imposing man who served as the HOA president. He was known for his rigid adherence to rules and his uncompromising nature, making Brenda seem almost flexible by comparison. He surveyed the scene, his gaze resting first on the still shaking mother and child, then on me, and finally on Brenda. Brenda, what is the meaning of this commotion? He barked, his voice accustomed to being obeyed. Brenda, seemingly regaining some of her composure, puffed out her chest. Mr. Sterling, there was an incident. The little girl got stuck on the climber. And, she paused, shooting a quick, conflicted glance at me, Mr. Davies here, he helped get her down. Mr. Sterling's eyes narrowed on me. Mr. Davies. I believe we have an outstanding issue with you regarding the lake property. His tone was accusatory, his focus immediately shifting back to the earlier dispute. It seemed the momentary crisis of the child had done little to deter his iron will for order and control. He was like a shark who had smelled blood, and the trespassing incident was his prey. Officer Miller stepped forward, holding up my deed. Mr. Sterling, we have reviewed Mr. Davies's property deed. The portion of Willow Creek Lake where he was fishing, and indeed this entire area where we are standing, falls within his legal property boundaries. It is not HOA common property. Mr. Sterling's jaw dropped. His face, usually a picture of stern control, twisted in disbelief. That's impossible. This entire development was sold to us with the understanding that the lake was a shared amenity. The HOA maintains it. With all due respect, sir, Officer Davis interjected, the county records corroborate Mr. Davies's deed. His ownership of this land, including a significant portion of the lake, predates the establishment of this HOA. A vein throbbed in Mr. Sterling's temple. He looked from the officers to me, his gaze full of fury and utter shock. This is preposterous. This cannot be. We paid a premium for lake access. This will not stand. He turned to Brenda, his voice rising, Brenda, why wasn't this brought to my attention? Why did we not verify these claims? Brenda stammered, her brief moment of humility vanishing under Mr. Sterling's intense scrutiny. I assumed, everyone assumed, it was part of the common area. Assumptions, Brenda, Mr. Sterling seethed, are not facts. This is a monumental error. A colossal blunder. He began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back, his mind clearly racing to comprehend the implications of this revelation. The pristine image of their meticulously planned community was suddenly marred by a foundational crack. His eyes swept over the now-relieved parents and children, then back to me, the unexpected wrench in his perfect machine. The air crackled with his barely contained rage. The quiet afternoon had turned into a full-blown crisis for the HOA leadership, a much larger storm brewing than even Brenda's initial complaints. I knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning of a truly chaotic chapter, and I was at its very center, the unsuspecting owner of the forbidden lake. Mr. Sterling's face was a mask of furious disbelief, a stark contrast to the relief that still lingered on the faces of the parents from the playground rescue. He paced back and forth, his perfectly tailored suit jacket rippling with his agitated movements. Brenda, looking like a deer caught in headlights, kept glancing between Mr. Sterling and me, clearly terrified of his wrath. The two police officers, Officer Miller and Officer Davis, remained present, observing the escalating tension. They had transitioned from dealing with a trespassing complaint to witnessing a full-blown HOA meltdown, a situation far removed from their usual duties. "This is unacceptable," Mr. Sterling thundered, his voice echoing across the now quiet playground. "Absolutely unacceptable. How could we have purchased this land without a proper survey? How could this fundamental detail be overlooked?" He gestured wildly towards the lake, then towards me. "So, you're telling me, Mr. Davies, that this lake, the very centerpiece of our community, is yours?" "A significant portion of it, yes," I confirmed, trying to keep my voice even despite the chaos. "And the land where we are currently standing also falls within my property lines. My deed, as the officers have verified, predates the HOA's existence." Mr. Sterling's face turned a shade of puce I hadn't thought possible. He whirled on Brenda. "Brenda, as head of the Architectural Review Committee and a key negotiator in the land acquisition, how did you miss this? This is a dereliction of duty." Brenda stammered, "But, Mr. Sterling, the developers assured us. They showed us the plans. The marketing materials clearly indicated the lake was a shared amenity." Her voice was shrill, her usual composure completely shattered under the barrage of his accusations. "Assurances are not legal documents, Brenda," he roared, practically spitting the words. "We relied on unverified claims? This is amateur hour. Our entire property value proposition is based on this lake access." He then turned his ire back to me. "Mr. Davies, this is an affront to our community. You cannot simply claim a natural resource that rightfully belongs to the residents of Serenity Shores." "It's not a claim, Mr. Sterling," I said, my patience starting to wear thin. "It's a matter of legal ownership. I bought this land, and Willow Creek Lake was part of the purchase. My family has history with this land, long before any of your luxury estates were dreamed up." Officer Miller stepped in, sensing the volatile atmosphere. "Mr. Sterling, with all due respect, Mr. Davies is within his legal rights. Any dispute regarding the property lines would need to be handled through civil court, not here." Mr. Sterling ignored him, his gaze fixed on me, a new, menacing glint in his eye. "Oh, there will be disputes, Mr. Davies. Believe me. This will not stand. We will explore every legal avenue to reclaim what is rightfully ours. You will find yourself facing the full force of the Serenity Shores Homeowners Association, and we have deep pockets." His words were a direct threat, a declaration of war. I met his gaze, refusing to back down. "My land, my lake. I have the documents to prove it. And I intend to defend my property rights." Just as the tension reached its peak, a small voice broke through the adult drama. "Mommy, can we go home? I'm cold." It was the little girl I had rescued, now bundled in her mother's arms, her eyes wide as she took in the angry exchange. Her innocent question seemed to deflate some of the immediate animosity, if only for a moment. Mr. Sterling, however, remained rigid. "This conversation is not over, Mr. Davies. Not by a long shot." He then turned on his heel, motioning for Brenda to follow him, and they stalked off towards the Grand HOA clubhouse, their voices still audible as Mr. Sterling continued to berate Brenda. The officers, after exchanging another knowing glance with me, also prepared to leave. Officer Miller paused. "Just be prepared, Mr. Davies. HOAs, especially ones like this, can be relentless. You might want to consider legal counsel. I thanked him, watching them drive away. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, casting long, purple shadows across the lake. The earlier drama of the child's rescue and Brenda's public humiliation had now given way to something far more substantial, a full-blown legal battle with a powerful HOA. My quiet sanctuary was about to become a battleground. A few days later, a thick, official-looking envelope arrived at my cabin. It contained a formal letter from the HOA's legal team, demanding that I cease and desist all activity on the lake and acknowledge their ownership of the common area. They threatened immediate legal action if I did not comply. Accompanying it was a notice for a special emergency HOA meeting, specifically to address the Willow Creek Lake encroachment. They were wasting no time. My initial reaction was a mix of anger and frustration. My peaceful existence was now under attack. But beneath that, a deeper resolve began to set in. This wasn't just about property anymore, it was about principle. It was about standing up for what was right against powerful forces that sought to control everything. This was my home, my sanctuary, and I wasn't going to let them take it without a fight. I called a lawyer specializing in property disputes, a friend of a friend who had a reputation for being tenacious. He listened patiently as I explained the situation, from the initial purchase with Mrs. Henderson to the current threat from the HOA. "Ben," he said, his voice calm and reassuring, "your deed is ironclad. Their claims are based on assumptions, not law. We have a very strong case." His confidence bolstered my spirits. We began preparing our defense, gathering all the original documents, surveys, and historical records related to the land. It was a tedious process, unearthing old papers, cross-referencing dates, and building an irrefutable timeline of ownership. Meanwhile, life in Serenity Shores became increasingly tense. Neighbors, once merely cordial, now looked at me with suspicion. Brenda, surprisingly, avoided me altogether. Mr. Sterling, however, seemed to relish making my life difficult. He personally oversaw the installation of private property. HOA residents only signs around the edges of the lake that bordered the HOA land, carefully avoiding my side, but clearly designed to send a message. He even tried to have my internet service disconnected, claiming my cabin was outside the approved service area for the development, a move that was quickly debunked by the service provider. These were petty, harassing tactics, but they were a constant reminder of the looming battle. One evening, as I was working on my laptop, meticulously organizing documents for my lawyer, there was a knock at my cabin door. It was well past dark, and I wasn't expecting anyone. My hand instinctively went to the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. Opening the door cautiously, I found myself face to face with an unexpected visitor. It was the little girl I had rescued from the playground, standing with her mother, who clutched a large casserole dish. The girl, whose name I now knew was Lily, was holding a small, hand-drawn picture of a boat on a lake. "We just wanted to thank you again, Mr. Davies," Lily's mother said softly, her eyes filled with warmth. "And Lily wanted to give you this." Lily shyly extended the drawing. It was a simple picture, but it was filled with heartfelt gratitude. My heart melted a little. "Thank you, Lily," I said, accepting the drawing. "It's beautiful. And I made you a lasagna," her mother added. "It's the least we could do. We heard about the other troubles. We just wanted you to know that not everyone in the HOA feels that way." Her words were a balm to my weary spirit. In the midst of the looming legal storm, this small act of kindness was a powerful reminder that not everyone was against me. There were good people, people who understood, even if they couldn't openly defy the HOA. It gave me a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder of the quiet, good things I was fighting to protect. But as they turned to leave, a piercing beam of light suddenly cut through the darkness, sweeping across my cabin from the direction of the HOA property line, a blinding glare that seemed designed to intimidate. It paused, lingering on my door, before slowly moving away. It was a stark, aggressive message, a clear indication that the HOA surveillance had begun, a chilling escalation in their campaign against me. This wasn't just about legal papers anymore, it was about psychological warfare. The blinding sweep of the spotlight from the HOA property line sent a shiver down my spine, a crude, undeniable message that their surveillance had begun. It lingered for a moment, an unblinking eye in the darkness, before slowly retracting, leaving me in the relative peace of my cabin but with a newfound sense of unease. This was no longer just about property lines or legal battles, it was a clear attempt at intimidation, a psychological tactic designed to make me feel constantly watched and vulnerable. They weren't just fighting in court, they were trying to chip away at my peace, hoping I'd give in. The next few weeks were a blur of legal preparations. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Chen, was meticulous. We spent hours poring over documents, cross-referencing maps, and gathering witness statements from elderly residents who remembered the land before the HOA's existence. Ms. Chen discovered that the developers had indeed presented a misleading narrative to the HOA, implying that the entire lake was part of the common property, even though my deed clearly showed otherwise. It was a classic case of corner-cutting and negligence, and Mr. Sterling, in his eagerness to create a luxury community, had evidently failed to conduct proper due diligence. The HOA, true to Mr. Sterling's word, launched a full-scale assault. They sent more threatening letters, attempted to block my access to the main road by claiming an easement dispute, a claim quickly dismissed by the county. And even started a whisper campaign in the neighborhood, painting me as an uncooperative rogue who was trying to sabotage their community's value. I overheard snippets of conversations in the local grocery store, hushed tones and suspicious glances following me down the aisles. It was isolating, but the lasagna and lilies drawing on my fridge were constant reminders that not everyone was against me. Brenda, however, had undergone a curious transformation. After her public humiliation and the close call with Lily, she seemed to soften. She no longer glared at me. Instead, sometimes, when our paths crossed, she'd offer a hesitant, almost apologetic nod. It was subtle, but it was there, a crack in her once impenetrable facade of self-importance. Perhaps the near tragedy had shaken her more than she let on, or perhaps Mr. Sterling's relentless criticism had made her realize she was just another pawn in his power games. The day of the big HOA meeting arrived, feeling less like a community gathering and more like a public trial. The large ballroom in the HOA clubhouse was packed. Every chair was filled, and people stood along the walls. Mr. Sterling sat at the head table, flanked by Brenda and other board members, all looking stern and unyielding. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the crowd, clutching my stack of deeds and maps. I calmly presented my case, showing the irrefutable evidence of my property lines, the dates of my purchase, and the clear distinction between my land and the HOA's. I spoke not with anger, but with a quiet conviction, explaining my long-standing connection to the land and my desire for peace. Then, Ms. Chen took over, her voice sharp and authoritative as she laid out the legal facts. She exposed the developers' deceptive practices and the HOA's negligence in verifying the property boundaries. She made it clear that any attempt to reclaim my lake would be a costly and ultimately futile legal battle for the HOA, potentially opening them up to lawsuits from residents who felt misled by the initial property descriptions. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Whispers broke out among the residents, not of anger towards me, but of concern and frustration towards the HOA board. They realized they had been sold a false promise. Mr. Sterling, red-faced and furious, tried to interject, to dismiss our evidence, but Ms. Chen wouldn't let him. She expertly dismantled his arguments, leaving him sputtering and increasingly desperate. It was then, in the midst of this heated exchange, that Brenda did something utterly unexpected. She stood up, her face pale but determined. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice trembling slightly but clear enough to cut through the murmuring crowd, "what Ms. Chen is saying, it's true. I reviewed the original sales documents myself, and the wording about the lake was ambiguous, at best. We made assumptions based on the developer's presentations, not on concrete legal definitions of property lines. We were misled. A stunned silence fell over the room. Mr. Sterling's head whipped around, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and betrayal. "Brenda! What are you doing?" he hissed, clearly furious that she was undermining him. "I'm telling the truth," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "And frankly, I'm tired of the bullying. Mr. Davies saved Lily's life just a few weeks ago. He's not a menace. He's just trying to live on his own property, and we, as an HOA, have created an unnecessary conflict." Her words were a bombshell. The room erupted into a cacophony of voices. Residents started demanding answers, expressing their anger not at me, but at the HOA board for their deception and their aggressive tactics. Mr. Sterling tried to regain control, banging his gavel, but it was useless. Brenda's unexpected honesty had shattered his authority, igniting a rebellion from within his own ranks. The carefully constructed facade of the HOA, built on rigid rules and strict control, was crumbling before everyone's eyes. As the meeting descended into chaos, amidst the shouts and demands for accountability, a small, unassuming man, sitting quietly in the back row, suddenly stood up. He had a weathered face and kind eyes, and he carried a tattered leather satchel. He raised a hand, and surprisingly, the noise in the room died down, as if sensing something important was about to happen. "Excuse me," he said, his voice soft but carrying surprising weight, "I believe I can shed some light on this." He walked slowly towards the front, holding up an old, yellowed map. It was a much older, more detailed survey than even mine, dating back generations. "My name is John Miller," he announced, "and my family has lived in this area for over 100 years. This lake, Willow Creek Lake, used to be known by a different name, the Old Swimming Hole, and it's always been known as part of the Davies family land. My grandfather, he helped survey some of this land, and he always spoke of the Davies family's deep roots here." He laid the ancient map on the table next to my deed, its lines perfectly aligning with mine, showing a clear, undeniable chain of ownership stretching back through time, long before any developer or HOA existed. He then looked directly at Mr. Sterling, his kind eyes hardening slightly. "Furthermore," he continued, "I know for a fact that the previous owner, Mrs. Henderson, made it very clear during the initial land discussions that her portion of the lake was not for sale to the developers. They tried to buy it, but she refused. She only sold it to Mr. Davies here because he promised to cherish and protect it, just as her family always had." The revelation was like a thunderclap. Mr. Sterling's face went from red to ashen. Brenda looked stunned, then a flicker of relief crossed her features. The room erupted again, this time with righteous indignation directed squarely at the HOA and the developers who had misled them. The sheer audacity of the developers, combined with the HOA's negligence, was laid bare. Mr. Sterling, defeated, could only stammer, trying to deflect, but his authority was utterly broken. The meeting spiraled into an emergency discussion about potential lawsuits against the developers and, implicitly, a reckoning for the HOA board itself. I stood there, watching the scene unfold, a profound sense of relief washing over me. My quiet life at Willow Creek Lake, my sanctuary, was safe. The battle was won, not just through legal documents, but through unexpected kindness, the power of truth, and a surprising turn of events from even my former adversary, Brenda. The HOA Karen, as I had privately thought of her, had found her conscience, and in doing so, she had helped to expose a much larger truth. The lake was mine, undeniably, and the peace I had sought for so long was finally returning. As the meeting broke down into a flurry of angry questions directed at the board, I quietly slipped out, heading back to my cabin, to the tranquil waters of my lake. The air outside felt crisp and clean, and for the first time in a long time, I knew I truly was home, no longer a trespasser on my own land, but its rightful, peaceful custodian.